Prophet Zawadi arrived, everything changed. A man of great stature, his hair wild and eyes burning with intensity, he came from a distant land with promises of miracles that no one had ever seen. The village was abuzz with whispers of his extraordinary powers, how he healed the sick, foretold the future, and even brought the dead back to life. One morning, a crowd gathered before the newly built temple where Zawadi had taken residence. The temple stood in stark contrast to the humble homes of the villagers, a place of grandeur and opulence. "Gather, all of you," Zawadi's voice rang out from the temple steps, commanding attention without effort. His smile was both warm and distant, as though he held the knowledge of the universe. Among the crowd was Lindy, a skeptical young woman who had heard stories about Zawadi's wonders. She wasn't sure if she believed in miracles, but something about his presence intrigued her. The people crowded around as Zawadi raised his arms, his voice now a melody that seemed to harmonize with the breeze. "Today, you will see miracles unfold before your eyes. Your faith will be tested, and your burdens will be lifted." Lindy, standing at the back of the crowd, could only watch in awe. She felt a shiver run down her spine as he spoke, as if the air itself had shifted. The first miracle. The morning sun was high in the sky when Prophet Zawadi began his sermon. His voice was hypnotic, drawing the attention of every single person in the crowd. He spoke of healing, of faith, of the invisible threads that bound the universe together. As he spoke, the air around him seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy. Then he called out, "Musa." Zawadi's voice was firm and unyielding. "You stand in this crowd with a heavy heart. You seek forgiveness for the sins of your past. You have carried this burden for too long." The crowd fell silent, eyes turning to Musa, a man in his mid-30s who had been standing at the back, his eyes downcast. How did Zawadi know his name? Musa's heart skipped a beat as the prophet continued, his words cutting through the crowd like a blade. "You have long sought redemption for the things you have done," Zawadi said softly, stepping forward to face Musa. "But you are not alone, Musa. I can help you." Musa stepped forward hesitantly. "How? How do you know this?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. The crowd held its breath. "I know all," Prophet Zawadi replied with a knowing smile. "Your guilt will be lifted. Trust me." The prophet placed his hands on Musa's forehead. A quiet hum filled the air as the crowd watched in awe. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. Musa's body relaxed, his heavy shoulders lifted as if a weight had been removed. He looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. I feel free," Musa whispered, tears streaming down his face. The crowd erupted into applause, their faith now fully pledged to the prophet. Lindiwe's doubt. Lindiwe couldn't shake the unease that settled deep in her gut. She had witnessed the miracle, seen the joy in Musa's eyes, and heard the cheers of the people. But something felt wrong. She watched the people around her, their faces filled with reverence, hanging on every word Zawadi spoke. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to share in their faith. She had known too many con men in her life, charlatans who used people's hopes and fears for their own gain. That evening, she stood by the fire, staring into the flames. "Why does it feel like I'm being pulled into something dark?" she muttered to herself. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Amina, a kind woman who had become close to Lindy. Amina sat beside her, her expression thoughtful. "What's troubling you, Lindy?" "I can't explain it," Lindy replied, her voice filled with frustration. "Everything seems too easy. Prophet Zawadi offers miracles, but I wonder, what's the cost?" Amina frowned, casting a nervous glance toward the temple. "You mustn't think that way. He is a man of God. His power is beyond our understanding. But at what cost?" Lindy asked, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "He takes their burdens, but what does he take in return? What does he demand of them?" Amina's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "I don't know, but maybe we just have to trust. He has helped so many." Lindiwe's doubts deepened, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was hidden beneath Zawadi's charm. Days passed, and Lindy couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Prophet Zawadi continued to perform his miracles, and people flocked to him from every corner of the land. Each person who left his presence seemed lighter, freer, but Lindy noticed the subtle changes in their eyes. There was something vacant about them, as if they had left a part of themselves behind. One afternoon, during a service, Prophet Zawadi singled out a woman named Kemi. She had been childless for many years, and the prophet spoke of a curse placed upon her by someone close to her. "Kemi," Zawadi called out, his voice calm but commanding. Your suffering is not of your doing. It was your mother-in-law who cursed you, preventing you from having children." The crowd gasped. Kemi stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. "That can't be true." Zawadi's eyes softened, yet there was an air of certainty in his words. "It is true. The curse has bound you for many years. But I can break it. If you follow my guidance, your womb will be opened." Kemi hesitated, her mind racing. She had long suspected that her mother-in-law held ill intentions toward her, but hearing it out loud was a shock. Zawadi stepped closer to her, his voice lower now, almost soothing. "Come to the altar. Place the item she gave you there, and I will break the curse," he said gently. Kemi felt torn, but the hope of motherhood outweighed her doubts. She moved forward, and as the prophet prayed, she felt a tingling sensation, as though the curse had been lifted. The congregation stood in awe, watching her transformation. But Lindiwe, standing in the back, felt a chill run down her spine. Something didn't sit right with her, and the more she saw, the more she questioned the prophet's true nature. Tafari, a woman who had been working tirelessly in the temple as one of Zawadi's assistants, noticed the same disturbing trend. While the congregation flourished in the prophet's presence, the workers, those who served him without question, seemed to grow weaker with each passing day. One evening, after a particularly long and grueling service, Tafari found herself sitting with Amina, who had been part of the prophet's inner circle for months. "Amina," Tafari began, her voice low, "why does everyone seem so drained?" Amina looked around nervously before speaking. "We give our strength to the prophet, hoping that one day we will be rewarded. But you're not," Tafari said bluntly. "Look at you. Look at the others. You're all tired, hollow." Amina hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "You don't understand. We are meant to serve. The prophet's power is beyond our comprehension. He does what we cannot." Tafari's eyes narrowed. "But at what cost? What happens when you give everything, and nothing comes back?" Amina fell silent, unable to answer. Tafari stood up, her heart heavy with the realization that something was terribly wrong. The days grew longer, and the village of Kinyama fell under a strange kind of spell. The people had become devoted to Prophet Zawadi, their faith unshaken by the doubts that slowly crept into Lindiwe's mind. She couldn't help but notice the changes in them, how their eyes, once vibrant, seemed dull and distant. They spoke of Zawadi with reverence, but there was something in their tone, a hidden emptiness that made her stomach churn. Lindiwe found herself visiting the market one morning, where she overheard a conversation between two women, both of whom had been frequent visitors to the temple. "Have you noticed?" one woman whispered, her voice trembling. "People, they change after seeing the prophet. They become more distant, like they're not really themselves anymore." The other woman nodded, her face pale. "I've heard stories. Some say the prophet asks for things that aren't spoken of openly. There are whispers, Lindiwe. Whispers that he doesn't just take away pain. He takes away something more." Lindiwe felt a shiver run down her spine as she listened to the conversation. What were they talking about? What was Zawadi really asking for from his followers? The rumors were starting to match her suspicions. She had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. That night, Lindiwe couldn't sleep. Her thoughts raced as she lay in bed, the weight of the rumors heavy on her chest. She had to know more, so she decided to confront Prophet Zawadi herself. With a firm resolve, she made her way to the temple under the cover of darkness. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the towering structure. The temple was silent, but Lindiwe knew that wasn't enough to keep the truth hidden. She approached the back entrance, where the prophet's inner circle entered and exited. She waited, hidden in the shadows, until she saw a familiar face, Tafari, one of the prophet's assistants. "Tafari," Lindiwe whispered urgently as she stepped forward. Tafari looked startled, her eyes wide with surprise. "Lindiwe, what are you doing here?" "It's late. I need answers," Lindiwe said, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. "What is happening inside that temple? Why are people changing? What is Prophet Zawadi asking from them?" Tafari hesitated, glancing around nervously before stepping closer. "You don't understand. It's not just about healing. It's more than that. Zawadi offers us power, power that no one else can give." Lindiwe's heart pounded. "What kind of power?" Tafari looked conflicted, her eyes darting to the temple doors. "The kind that comes at a price. He asks for things we don't talk about. Personal things. Your faith isn't enough. He wants your soul. Lindy recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. What? No. That's not possible. Tafari's face softened with regret. I didn't understand either, not at first. But once you give him a part of yourself, it's gone. You can't take it back. Lindy stepped back, her mind spinning. How do I stop this? How do I save the others? Tafari shook her head. I don't know, but you have to find out the truth. Only then will you know how to break free. Lindy spent the next few days gathering what little information she could from the villagers and from the few who still dared to speak out about Zawadi. Slowly, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The Prophet's miracles were not what they seemed, and the people who followed him were not just receiving blessings, they were being manipulated. One night, after the temple had emptied, Lindy snuck inside. She had learned that the Prophet performed his rituals in a hidden chamber beneath the temple, a place no one was allowed to see. She had to find out what was happening there. As she descended into the dark, stone hallway, Lindy's heart raced. The air was thick with tension, and a sense of dread washed over her. She reached the chamber door, her hands shaking as she pushed it open. Inside, the room was filled with dim light. Zawadi stood at the center, his back to her. The floor was covered in intricate symbols and strange artifacts. At the edges of the room, shadowy figures knelt, their heads bowed in submission. Prophet Zawadi, Lindy's voice broke the silence. Zawadi turned slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling calmness. Ah, Lindy, I've been expecting you. Lindy's voice faltered. What is this place? What is happening to the people? What are you doing to them? Zawadi's smile widened. You are wise to ask questions, my dear. But wisdom alone will not save you. He stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. The people you see around you, these loyal followers, they have given me their deepest fears, their darkest desires. And in return, I grant them what they crave. Power, freedom, miracles. Lindy took a step back. But you're taking their souls. You're taking their very essence. Zawadi laughed softly, the sound echoing through the chamber. Everything comes at a price, Lindy. Even the greatest blessings. The betrayal. Lindy's heart raced as the realization hit her like a wave. Zawadi was not a healer. He was a manipulator, a parasite feeding off the energy of his followers. But what could she do? How could she stop him when the entire village had fallen under his spell? She turned to run, but Zawadi's voice stopped her in her tracks. You cannot escape, Lindy. You are already part of this. You've always been a part of my plan. Lindy froze. What do you mean? Zawadi stepped closer, his eyes glowing with a strange, almost hypnotic intensity. From the moment you doubted me, I knew you would come to find the truth. I welcome that. You're special, Lindy. You have a strength within you, one that I can use. No, she whispered, shaking her head. You're lying. I'm not, Zawadi said softly, his voice almost tender. You were always meant to join me. You've always been drawn to the darkness. Just like them. Lindy's chest tightened with fear. I'll never join you. Zawadi smiled, his expression cruel. You already have, my dear. You're too late. The power of choice. Lindy stood at the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of Zawadi's words pressed down on her. She wanted to believe that she could still escape, that she could still save the people she loved. But Zawadi's presence was overwhelming, his influence stretching out like an invisible web, ensnaring everyone around her. But then, something inside Lindy clicked. It wasn't too late. She could still fight back. She closed her eyes, focusing on the one thing that had kept her grounded through all of this. The love she had for her village, for the people she cared about. That love was stronger than any dark force Zawadi could wield. No, Lindy said firmly, her voice trembling with newfound resolve. You won't take me. Zawadi's eyes narrowed. You can't resist forever, Lindy. But she wasn't afraid anymore. The power he had over her was no match for her determination. She would not give in to him. She would not let the village fall under his control. As she turned to leave, Zawadi's laughter echoed behind her, but Lindy didn't look back. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. The battle for Kinyama had just begun. Lindy's heart raced as she hurried through the dark corridors of the temple. The sound of Zawadi's menacing laughter echoed through the walls, reminding her of the dangerous path she had chosen. She could feel his power trying to pull her back, his words haunting her mind. You cannot escape me, Lindy. You are mine, Zawadi's voice echoed, but she refused to give in. Her mind was clear now, and her resolve was stronger than ever. She wouldn't let him control her, and she certainly wouldn't let him have her soul. She reached the back entrance of the temple, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. But just as she was about to step outside, a figure appeared in front of her. "Tafari," Lindy whispered, surprised but relieved. You're here." Tafari, one of Zawadi's assistants, looked pale and fearful, her eyes filled with regret. "Lindy, you don't know what you're up against. You must leave before it's too late." "I can't," Lindy replied. "I can't let him continue this. I know the truth now. I have to stop him." "You're right," Tafari whispered urgently. "But you can't do it alone. He's too powerful." "I won't be alone," Lindy said, her voice steady. "I'll gather those who are still capable of fighting him. There are others who have begun to see the truth." Tafari hesitated, then nodded, a look of quiet relief on her face. "Then I'll help you. But we have to move quickly. Zawadi has eyes everywhere." With that, the two women slipped out of the temple, the weight of the mission ahead of them pressing heavily on their shoulders. The battle to save the village had begun. The days that followed were filled with secret meetings and hushed whispers. Lindy and Tafari sought out those in the village who had begun to doubt Zawadi's true intentions, gathering a small group of rebels who were willing to fight for the truth. One evening, they met in the forest, hidden from the prying eyes of Zawadi's loyal followers. Lindy looked around at the faces gathered before her. There was a mixture of fear, determination, and desperation. These were the people who still had faith in their community, in the spirit of hope that had once filled the village. "We cannot let Zawadi control us anymore," Lindy said, her voice strong and clear. "He's taking everything from us, our lives, our souls, our hope. We have to stand up to him." "But how?" a man named Jabu asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. "He's too powerful. People worship him. If we oppose him, they'll turn against us." Tafari stepped forward, her expression serious. "The power he wields is dark, but it's not invincible. We've seen it crack. There are weaknesses. We just need to expose the truth." Lindy nodded. "We know he's feeding off the energy of the people, using their fears and desires against them. But we can stop him. We can take back what he's stolen." "But how do we reach the others?" a woman named Bongi asked. "Zawadi has the whole village under his spell. They won't listen." Lindy's eyes sparkled with determination. "We will make them listen. We will show them the truth. When they see his power for what it is, they'll turn on him." The group fell silent, the weight of their task sinking in. But Lindy could see the spark of hope in their eyes. They were ready. Together, they would take a stand against Zawadi. The plan was set into motion the following Sunday. Lindy and her group knew that the Prophet would be holding his service, gathering his followers in the temple for another round of manipulation. This was their chance to expose him. The service began as usual, with Zawadi standing on the podium, his voice smooth and confident. He spoke with an air of power, drawing the people in with his promises of miracles and blessings. The villagers listened, their eyes fixed on him, as if entranced by his every word. But Lindy and her group were ready. They had gathered evidence of the Prophet's dark dealings. Witnesses who had seen the rituals in the hidden chambers, testimonies from those who had been manipulated, and most importantly, a vial of the strange, glowing substance that Zawadi used in his rituals. As Zawadi raised his hands, preparing to perform another miracle, Lindy stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmur of the congregation. "Stop!" Lindy cried, her words echoing in the quiet temple. "You are being deceived. This man does not heal, he steals." Gasps rippled through the crowd as eyes turned toward Lindy. Zawadi's calm demeanor faltered for a split second, but then his smile returned, a mask of feigned surprise. "Lindy," Zawadi said, his voice smooth but dripping with contempt. "You should know better than to challenge me. The people trust me. They know I am their salvation." "They trusted you," Lindy retorted, holding up the vial of glowing substance. "And this is what you've been using to control them. You've been feeding off their fears, their hopes, their very souls. This isn't healing. This is witchcraft." The crowd murmured, their eyes widening as the truth began to sink in. Some of the followers looked uncomfortable, their belief in the Prophet wavering. But others stood firm, shaking their heads in disbelief. "You are the one who has been deceived, Lindy," Zawadi said, his tone darkening. "You're only speaking out because you fear the truth. I offer power that no one else can." "We've seen the truth now," Lindy replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And we will stop you."
The truth was out, but the battle was far from over. Zawadi's followers were divided, some clinging to the Prophet, others beginning to question his power. Tensions ran high as the conflict between the two sides escalated. Lindy and her group knew that they couldn't just expose the truth, they had to fight back. They had to destroy the source of Zawadi's power, once and for all. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the temple, under the full moon. The air was thick with energy, the tension palpable as Lindy and her followers faced off against Zawadi and his loyalists. Zawadi stood at the center of the temple, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You think you can defeat me? I am the Prophet. I control everything." Lindy stepped forward, holding the vial of glowing substance high. "Not anymore. The power you hold is nothing but lies. It's time for the truth to come to light." With that, she shattered the vial, releasing a burst of light that filled the temple. The energy surged, swirling around the room as the ground trembled beneath their feet. "No!" Zawadi screamed as the light engulfed him. His form began to distort, his true, demonic nature revealing itself to the terrified crowd. But it was too late. The light of truth had broken his hold over the village. The people watched in awe as Zawadi's power crumbled, his dark form disintegrating into nothingness. Lindy and her group stood victorious, their mission accomplished. The village was free from Zawadi's control, and the people could finally begin to heal. In the days that followed, the village of Kinyama began to rebuild. The people, once bound by fear and deception, were now free. They celebrated their newfound freedom, and Lindy, along with her friends, worked tirelessly to help them heal. The temple, once a place of darkness, was now empty, a hollow shell of its former self. But as the sun rose over the village, a sense of hope filled the air. The people knew that they had a long road ahead of them, but together, they could rebuild their lives and restore the true spirit of their community. Lindy stood at the edge of the village, watching as the children played and the adults worked together. She smiled, knowing that they had triumphed over the darkness, and that their future was now theirs to shape. The village of Kinyama was free, and a new beginning had begun.